Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're zeroing in on a very specific snapshot in time, May 15th, 2026. We're going to connect the dots between some headlines that might seem totally unrelated at first glance. We'll look at the mounting friction in the global economy, some frankly bizarre societal reactions to public health scares, and finally, the incredible scientific breakthroughs pushing back against all these challenges. So let's dive right in and see how these massive global waves eventually ripple right down to our own front doors.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, shifting borders and economies. Second, health crises and deathbeds. And third, scientific resilience and optimism.
But before we get into the heavy macroeconomic stuff, I want you to keep this one wild question in the back of your mind. How does a localized virus outbreak on a cruise ship somehow spark a $6 million offshore gambling frenzy? I know, it sounds exactly like the plot of a sci-fi thriller, but it's a very real sequence of events happening right now. We'll uncover exactly how global health anxiety connects to offshore prediction markets a little later on.
Chapter 1. Shifting Borders and Economies. Let's look at the demographic and financial pressures reshaping our world.
Okay, let's start with the macro picture. And honestly, it's a bit precarious. The IMF's fiscal monitor just issued a really stark warning. Global central banks are basically walking a tightrope right now. You've got sovereign debt hitting critical highs across major economies, and that's colliding head-on with sticky inflation. Throw in the financial strain and volatility coming from ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, and we're looking at some severe structural risks to global energy security.
But arguably just as critical as all that financial data is the number 1.59. Now, that's not an inflation metric, that is a demographic one. It represents the record low lifetime births per woman in the United States. Think tanks are actually calling this a profound American family crisis, and it sits right alongside those IMF warnings as a massive structural risk to our future.
So why is that 159 number setting off so many alarm bells? Well, a record low fertility rate signals severe, long-term economic implications. Think about it. A shrinking population literally means a shrinking workforce and an aging tax base. What we're seeing is the U.S. now directly mirroring the massive demographic crises that have been playing out in East Asia and Europe for a while. And the immediate ripple effect? It severely compounds global labor shortages, which directly impacts that fragile economy we just talked about.
And this is where we see a massive global collision happening. On one hand, we've got shifting labor pipelines. Because of the economic and security fallout from the Ukraine war, migrants from places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan are rapidly pivoting away from Russia, seeking out complex new routes into Europe, just to fill those labor gaps. But at the exact same time, borders are tightening. The U.S. Trump administration is intensifying its legal push against birthright citizenship and birth tourism. Meanwhile, the UK is experiencing these really sharp policy swings based entirely on public sentiment. So you have a desperate need for labor crashing head-on into strict national border enforcement.
There's a quote from some recent policy reviews that honestly just hits the nail on the head. International labor markets are navigating unpredictable regulatory shifts and cyclical swings in public sentiment. It's all about volatility. Whether you're looking at federal enforcement against birth tourism in the US or those shifting laws in the UK, the big takeaway is that global friction is peaking because policies are just wildly fluctuating in response to both economic needs and domestic pressures.
Let's move to Chapter 2. Health Crises and Deathbeds. This is where climate, disease, and pure speculation collide.
So, this all starts with the environment. The American Society for Microbiology and the American Geophysical Union just dropped a major joint report, and they are charting a completely new path for global health preparedness. Why? Because as they point out, climate change is dangerously reshaping the very landscape of infectious diseases right beneath our feet. We're seeing pathogens behave in completely new ways and popping up in entirely new places.
Now remember that wild cruise ship question from the start? Watch how fast this escalates. Step 1. A localized hantavirus outbreak happens on a cruise ship. In a normal era, that's just a local health story. But look at Step 2. Suddenly, over $6 million gets wagered on polymarket prediction markets. This triggers Step 3, where medical researchers in the prestigious journal Science actually step in and declare these wagers a literal public health threat. Which brings us to Step 4. Regulatory bodies in the US and Europe are now facing immense pressure to crack down on this entire offshore binary betting scene.
Let's define exactly what we're looking at here because it's pretty shocking. They're being called death bets.
Basically, these are wagers placed on online prediction markets about whether a specific disease outbreak is going to escalate into a full-blown WHO-defined pandemic before a certain date, in this case, the end of 2026. People are essentially putting cold, hard cash on the line, hoping for or betting against global devastation.
You might be wondering, why is this a bigger deal than just some quirky internet trend? Well, first off, these markets operate out of jurisdictions like Panama, completely bypassing local gambling bans. Second, the journal Science points out some massive risks here. We're talking about behavioral addiction to disaster speculation, and even the potential for democratic manipulation, where bad actors might try to mess with public health responses just to win a bet. It's a striking example of how global anxiety, mixed with unregulated tech platforms, can spawn a totally new category of public health threat.
All right, let's pivot to some good news in Chapter 3, Scientific Resilience and Optimism. Here is how we're fighting back with breakthroughs and partnerships.
We have some incredibly encouraging data coming out of the Phase 3 Valor trial. Pfizer and Valneva have developed a 6-valent Lyme disease vaccine candidate, meaning it targets 6 different strains of the bacteria, and it's showing over 70% efficacy. This is an absolute game changer for a disease that has plagued people for decades. It charts a clear path toward imminent global regulatory submissions, which is just a huge win for public health.
And then we have this totally fascinating microbiological discovery. New studies have revealed that compounds naturally found in everyday cranberry juice can actually resensitize resistant strains of E. coli to traditional antibiotics. We hear so many terrifying stories about the rise of drug-resistant superbugs, but here is a surprisingly accessible, natural way to potentially treat drug-resistant UTIs. It's like nature is handing us the key to making our existing medicines work again.
But it's not just about isolated discoveries. We are building real structural resilience. The American Society for Microbiology has officially launched its Mechanism Discovery Scientific Unit to speed up basic science against pandemic threats. Furthermore, major Western scientific societies are expanding formal partnerships with global virology societies. Their main goal? A unified tracking system for zoonotic spillover events. They are essentially building a massive global radar to catch the next outbreak long before it ever reaches a cruise ship, let alone an offshore prediction market.
Now let's zoom out to the broader tech landscape. Think about the dystopian vibe of that pandemic gambling we just talked about, and contrast it with this highly utopian shift happening in the post-ChatGPT world. In the immediate past, the narrative was completely dominated by regulatory panic and fear surrounding AI. But look at the present. We're seeing a massive global shift toward public optimism, actual innovation, and integrating AI right into our university systems.
And we can actually measure this shift globally. Comprehensive press analyses show that South America and East Asia are completely leading the charge here. Instead of framing AI as this looming threat to our jobs or humanity, these regions are actively framing artificial intelligence around cultural advancement and innovation. They're embracing these tools to help solve the exact demographic and economic frictions we discussed at the top of the explainer.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. We've looked at the economic cracks, the tightening borders, and that completely bizarre death bets trend, but we've also seen some absolutely incredible scientific breakthroughs, global biosecurity partnerships, and a huge wave of technological optimism. So with disease threats mounting and science accelerating faster than ever, I want to leave you with this. Are we betting on our demise, or are we engineering our survival? It's a duality that really defines our present moment. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.